All right, I think we have a quorum, so I want to share something that's very important to me, which is a video created for these slides. Here we go. Did it work?
And
Did we hear
still
it?
don't have the sound. We still don't have the sound. We still don't have the sound,
I
Jeff.
clicked,
Come on.
I clicked the share a sound. It says share the media sound in GoToWebinar. Oh, God. That's like the 5th session where nobody can hear the great
Right.
music. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Best, and this is Quarterly Q&A Live Spring Edition, coming from Boston, and joined by Seb Monnier from I don't know where, and Ryan. Just where are you from? You're from Pennsylvania. Like near
Yeah, Northeast
Here, come on,
Pennsylvania.
let me see you. Let me see your cameras, guys. You guys on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Ryan. Hi, everybody here.
Hi.
And
Hey,
hi
everybody.
from Colorado, actually.
Colorado. Okay. Although, who knows? He could be lying.
I'm in Northeast PA, 20 minutes from Scranton, if anyone's an Office fan.
20 minutes from Scranton. Everybody's an Office fan. Gotta be.
If they have taste.
I would explain it, but then you're not a fan, in which case you're not going to think it's cool anyway. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We actually have a special guest, because normally when we do Q&A Live, it's myself as sort of the MC, and Seb does all the hard work. But we have Ryan today as well. Some of you might know Ryan. He's all over tech support. He's our lead tech support engineer. He does an awesome job. He's the one typically answering your questions, and we thought we'd invite him in so you get a different face and actually hear from somebody that really knows what they're doing instead of somebody like me. So we will. Oh, all right. He's laughing, but he knows.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, I will call you when it's time. I'm going to walk through today's agenda so we all know what to expect. Lots of good topics, as always. We'll begin with a trigger we introduced not too long ago, 3 months ago, 2-3 months ago, a trigger for the synchronization progress for a headless CMS space. In other words, we knew when it started and when it stopped, but we had no idea about progress. Now you can get a sense for its level of progress, how close it is to completion. Why is this valuable? How can you use it? Good question. We'll talk about that during today's session. And then we'll kind of stick with that concept and talk about best practices for base synchronization. We've actually touched on this a little bit in the past, but it continues to be a topic of great interest for a lot of our customers. You can imagine if somebody's in the middle of doing something in your deployed experience, that would be a bad time to synchronize, because you might be stealing the content from them and changing it mid-process, right? That would be bad. So you need to do it at the right time, whatever that means. We'll talk about it, and doing it in a way that if somebody approaches the screen, they're aware that something is happening and they shouldn't progress. So we'll dive into that. And then we'll wrap up a look at the Headless CMS with one more small topic, which is about controlling the region used for storage of the media in your Headless CMS base. In the past, you had no control. It went to a very specific location, and we'll talk about that. You will now have some control, which is beneficial depending on where the experience is deployed. We'll talk about that, but including if it's closer to the deployment environment, then maybe it's a little faster in terms of synchronization. So we'll get to that. And the two other completely different topics. First, if you're building an interface asset for an API, typically a web API, and there's a problem, how do you debug that problem? You're calling an API, something's wrong, you're not getting back the answer you want, there's an issue. How do you debug that? How do you figure out what's wrong and then correct it? So this notion of debugging communication with APIs is maybe a little more advanced for some of you, but it's very good skill set. It's not as challenging as you think, but we'll get to that. And then we'll wrap things up with our guest host, Ryan, to talk about single trigger, multiple actions, and something among those multiple actions is not working right. The end result doesn't happen. It should. Action 1, Action 2, Action 3, they collectively should and lead to some result, but it doesn't. How do you debug that? How do you figure out what's wrong, and what can you do to prevent that problem in the future? He's got some great insight there. We get this question a decent amount. So that is today's agenda. Seb, if you're ready, we'll hand it off to you to talk all about the CMS.
Yep, I am. I just need to share my screen. And with the new GoToWebinar, share, there we go. All right, so let's start with these new sync triggers, synchronization triggers on the Headless CMS. You have them here on the left-hand side. And so far, you have the sync completed, sync failed, and sync started, which existed already for, what, a year, 2 years since we released the first CMS version. Now you have a new trigger, which is the sync in progress. And it comes with 3 parameters, the percent completed or percentage completed, the bytes downloaded, and the total bytes. So what is this going to help you build is something like this, a gauge, some kind of progression bar showing that the sync is happening and the sync is in progress and you know where you are. If you have a small CMS base, or I should say a base with small media files, you might not need that. You just need the sync started, sync completed. You show a display, a scene when you start your experience, and you're good to go. If you have something longer, and I'm talking multiple gigabytes because you have loads and loads of videos in your base, and you're installing this maybe for a trade show or maybe in a retail shop, you want to let the people who are actually doing the install know if they're going to be here for a few minutes or more, depending on their bandwidth. I've seen bases more than 10 or 15 gigabytes. That can take more than half an hour, more than an hour to download, again, depending on your connectivity. So how does that work? I'm going to go back into edit mode and show a gist of it. Of course, if I take a huge base right now, it's going to scramble my internet connection, so I'm not going to do that. So you will probably see it going from 0 to 100% very quickly, but still you will get the idea. I think I have this new baseball players base which has 2,000 records but 0 media. So it's a big base with no media, so it's a small media base. And in any case, on this base here, you can add a trigger. Usually what I do is when the sync started, I would show a scene or a group that contains these indicators, sync in progress, some kind of loading, or maybe even going with the bar. When it's completed, you would hide that or go to your main scene, and then you never come back to this scene unless you restart your experience. Now, the new one is this sync in progress. And again, I said this one has 3 parameters, trigger parameters. So how would you use that? If we look into the scene, we do have a linear gauge, this bar here. And on the gauge, you can do a set value. If you go into the value here, you can use a binding. And that's where you will actually see your trigger, sync in progress, and these 3 parameters. Percent completed. This will go from 0 to 100. So when I'm going to hit play, it should go from the left to the right, maybe pretty quickly. The next things you can do, I have 2 texts here, bytes completed and total bytes. And again, same ID. I'm going to use bytes completed, text, set text, use a binding again from the same trigger, bytes downloaded, completed, downloaded, and do the same thing for the total bytes. In this case, I think I took an example which is like 0 and 0 because I have 0 media files. But let's see, I'm going to hit play, and this gauge here will go or should go from the left, 0 to the right pretty quickly, and maybe even too quickly because, again, this space is too small. Maybe not the best example. You get the idea. That's the sync in progress. That's how you need to use these triggers and these 3 trigger parameters. So, Jeff, do we have any question about that, or is it clear enough? I mean, it's just one new trigger with 3 parameters and the ways you can inform whoever is in front of the screen about what's happening.
I mean, I think it's clear enough, but just a couple questions. This is percentage. So is there any relationship between percentage and time? There isn't, right? So it could be at 95% but take an hour. It could be at 10% and take another 10 seconds, right? There's no time relationship.
That's correct. The percent is in terms of bytes downloaded out of the total bytes. Now, depending on your network, on your connectivity, on the files in your base. Is it faster to download 100 images of 10 kilobytes or one video of 1 gigabyte? Depends. There's no rule for that, at least that I know of, which works 100% of the time. So that's why the only facts we have is how much we have downloaded versus how much we need to download.
Right. Right. Okay.
By the way,
Just
we also
making
have
sure.
this property here, and you can see I'm already synced, which is why I didn't even go through the sync process because I'm already at 100%. In Composer, while you are in edit mode, you already do the download. So that's why there's no progress because it was already synced before I hit play. So it's very difficult to demonstrate here, but you get the idea.
Synchronization is a, what do you call that? It only synchronizes the new stuff, right? It's a differential. Right. It's a differential sync, which means if you run the experience and there's nothing new, then the sync is super fast. There's nothing to sync. Yeah.
Correct.
So this is only if there's a change on the base that needs to be synchronized that you'll see something after the initial sync.
Yeah. So, for example, if I group all these objects, I'm going to call this my sync group. And if on the base I had a trigger sync completed, then I want to hide my group. This is going to work because the sync start and finish is like at the same time almost because everything is already synced on my machine. So when I hit play, it should, and that's the demo effect. Well, that's a good question. Maybe because the base is too fast. Bytes, maybe it's too fast.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good.
Maybe it's too fast.
Good thing.
I mean, by the time because I don't know when the synchronization occurs. If it occurs before you enter the scene, then it's already done.
Yeah, and maybe my machine as well today.
Okay.
So that's about the new trigger. Now, Now the next topic is about the best practices. So as Jeff mentioned, when do we do a base sync? Well, the first thing is there's one where you don't have a choice. When you start an experience, the player is syncing the base. That's not an option. So if you restart your experience, your machine, your player every night on an installation, which is like in a retail store or a museum, for example, once a day, when you restart the experience, the base will sync. That's what I call a good practice, because if anybody made a change and forgot to do a manual sync, which we're going to talk about in a minute, then this ensures that the experience always has the latest content from the base, at least on a daily basis. So for this, you have nothing to do except schedule your player, your device, or experience to restart daily, which again usually is also good practice regarding the operating system, especially if you're running on a Windows machine. So that's the first way or moment where a base would be synced. Now the next two options will really depend on the use case of the base. You need to sync it on a regular schedule, like every hour, I don't know, honestly. On this one, we've been asked to do that. I still don't understand the need, because either somebody makes a change in the CMS and then you want to do a manual sync like now, or you don't make a change and then you don't have anything to sync. So this one, to be honest, I'm not sure why somebody would want to do that, but we've been asked, so here it is. And then the other thing is on demand. There's a last minute change. I need to update the video because we have a customer coming into the showroom today and I need to push it now. Or this product is out of stock. I need to update the inventory. Shouldn't do that through the CMS. There should be APIs, but again, that's an example. So on a regular schedule to do that, you can use the clock interface set, you can use the scheduler interface set. On demand, you can use the web triggers. Again, I will demonstrate that. Now, in both cases, and that's really the important thing, we are talking about an interactive experience. Someone might be using the experience at that moment, whether it's when the clock decides to do sync or you receive a web trigger asking to do a sync. What do? Do you sync whatever's happening on the screen, or do you wait for the current user to be gone and for the experience to be quote unquote inactive? That's why I have these sub bullet points, because that really depends on how far you want to go or how important the update is. So the regular schedule option, again, we can use the clock. We can also use the scheduler. If you know how to speak Cron, you can figure this out by yourself, or you can use our helper to build that expression every day at 4 a.m. I want to do a sync, or every 2 hours I want to do a sync. The scheduler works great for that. On the clock here, I just did when the hours changed. Then don't look at that just yet. I'm going to say my baseball players, I want to sync that base. So if it comes from 8:59 to 9 a.m., at 9 a.m., the base will sync whatever is happening in the experience if you do that. If you use a web trigger from the base, from the button in your bookmarks in your browser, you can do the same thing. When I receive a message which says sync, then I can call an action baseball player sync. Again, in these cases, we are on the regular schedule or on demand, and whatever's happening on the experience, the base will sync. Maybe the content will blink, maybe the scene will go back to the sync scene we talked about earlier. Might not be ideal for a user, depending on, again, where this experience is being used. If you know this will only happen in a showroom at 7 a.m. before anybody is in, then yeah, you can do that. It's simple enough. You don't need to over-complexify this logic. Now, on the other end, if you want to make sure you do the sync when no user is actively using the XP, how can you do that? Going back to the clock, and before I open the trigger, I have added here a global variable. So from the interface set, use a variable to store some kind of information. I just call that sync base, and I will use this as a Boolean value, true or false. What we're doing here is we're using this as a flag. So whether I use the clock on the hour, every hour, I don't want to sync automatically. I just want to set a flag, please sync the base to true. If you're using the on-demand with the web triggers, same idea. When I receive my message sync, I don't want to sync the base right now. I just want to set the flag to true. Now, in your experience, again, depending on how it's built, you probably have some kind of a track screen. Whether the user says, I'm done, thank you, bye-bye, or there's an inactivity timer, you will always go back to this attract screen. That's where you can check that flag. So on this attract screen, I have a trigger here when the sync is being entered and a condition. If the value of this flag, this global variable, which I named sync base, is equal to true, then I want to do two things. I want to set the flag back to false. So we're good, we checked it. And I actually want to sync the base now because I'm the attract screen. I know no user is here. I'm not going to bother anybody who's interacting with the screen at that particular moment. May take a minute, may take 15 minutes, depending on how long the user is actually navigating through the other scenes before going back to the attract. But that ensures that the next user will have the synced content. That's what I call the best practice for synchronizing a base if you care about the users and what they will see while being in front of the experience. I'm going to pause here, Jeff. Again, come back to you, see if we have any questions about this process.
Couple questions. I mean, I love this technique of using the Boolean to determine whether or not it's safe to sync. And for example, the attract screen is a good time to do it. While sync is occurring, should you prevent new people from activating from initiating their interaction? You should prevent that, I guess.
Yes, definitely. So again, when you go back to the attract and If the flag is true and you do a sync, then whatever you have set, which we discussed in here, if you have a sync started, this should start displaying a layer that says sync is in progress. That would prevent clicking on the button to go through into the experience. Again, provide visual feedback. That goes along with this topic, showing that something is happening. Please wait a second. Something like that. Yes, definitely. That's a great question.
Okay. And this is more of a clarification because you said this whole idea, and we've talked about, I think, in different Q&A lives, that you can have a button in your browser that is actually it's a web trigger that will tell experiences to sync. Just for clarification, you cannot do that from the base itself. There is no function in Headless CMS to say everybody sync this base,
Not
correct?
yet. Not yet. This is in the works. So when you look into a base in your dashboard view, by the way, we do have some new information, which I don't know if you saw that. It's been released a couple of months ago. You have the size of the base. That's a good indicator to guess how long it's going to take. And in here, one day we will have a way to send a web trigger to all the experiences using that base. We don't have it yet. So for now, you have to use our API, the web trigger API, and you can just save that as a bookmark. So when you open a new tab, you could go into here, have something which sends that trigger refresh. That's what I was doing myself when I needed that. You could build an experience and host it on the web. You have multiple ways to send that API request, that web trigger API request. It's really only useful if you need to have this on-demand refresh. And again, remember, you can always say, if for the showroom scenario, there's a new guest coming in an hour, I can always just restart the experience from the share and deploy console, and it will automatically sync the base. So don't
Remotely
over-complexify
restart,
yeah. Only you need is restarting the experience to get the latest content. You can do that from your share and deploy if you're an enterprise user.
Great. Thanks, Seb. All right, you can go to the storage item.
All right. Storage region. This is going to be pretty quick. We have new properties on the base, and you can select the storage region. So again, taking this example here, that's the base I created a couple of weeks ago. And by default, HCMS decided that this base should be stored in North Virginia because I'm based in the US. I can click on this button here and do a change. You need to click this list. So you have a choice between US East, Europe, and Asia Pacific, Singapore. So why would you do that? What will it change? You might know that our Headless CMS infrastructure is based on AWS, Amazon Web Services. So we are using CloudFront from AWS quite a bit. All the download of the media is optimized as much as we can through this infrastructure, but you can help it by moving the data or storing the data the closest to the location where your experiences are going to be deployed. I'm thinking about our friends from New Zealand and Australia who have suffered in the past from all the data being stored in the US only. Now we can move it to Singapore, and the download times are much better, much faster. It's quicker to download the data into your experiences. So especially if you're going to have a base which is substantial, like half a gig or more, consider moving the location to what's closest to the region where the players are actually going to run this experience. Simple enough. I don't know if there's going to be any questions besides why 3 regions, why not more? Honestly,
Seb, I sent you a chat message with a link to the Help Center article because there's a good image in there that shows the regions mapped to the globe. So people get a sense for our recommendation. Yeah, right there.
Thank you.
So you have 3 choices for where the media is stored. What's interesting, by the way, is like this baseball base that Seb created. I don't care what region he picks. The text is still going to be in Americas. This is about media. Maybe that's a little behind the scenes, but it is technically true. And so if images, videos, documents, then you can choose where that would be stored under the covers. That's all Amazon Web Services. And yes, if you're in Asia Pacific, then you can choose that region for storage of the media. You don't have to keep it in the Americas. So that'll be It'll hopefully keep things faster, but also there are, Seb, I can't remember if you mentioned this, there are some intellectual property requirements imposed by IT organizations where they don't allow stuff to be stored out of Geo. Yeah.
I was going to. So the speed of download is one criteria for choosing the right region among these three. Another one might be IT policies. Like, without giving names, we have customers in Switzerland. They can only have their media hosted in Europe. That's the thing. That's it. So that's one of the reasons also why we added this kind of feature to help the process being simpler with some IT policies, IT requirements, depending on the kind of customers or companies you are or you are working with.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Seb. So now we have a little gear switch. So we're going to move off Headless CMS and talk about debugging API calls, which is even fascinating for me. I'm excited for this. Thanks, Seb.
Yeah, and I want to leave some time for Ryan's topic after that, so I will try to keep it simple, yet give you ideas about what can be done here. And Jeff mentioned interface assets, so web APIs. This mechanism can be used for many other topics, not just APIs. For example, if you have hardware peripherals like sensors, RFID readers, or barcode scanners, things like that, which are going to be different in the field than what you are using in the office. This process can be really helpful to help debug these kind of scenarios as well. So in this example here, I just have the default DALI interface asset from Composer. I am not putting an API key here. And so if I do a send, of course, in the experience, I'm going to receive an error here, invalid authorization header. All right, that's good. Now imagine I do put an API key in here, and I publish this experience and deploy it in the field. And then the player is running fine for a couple of weeks, and then at some point, network connectivity is down. This doesn't work anymore. Or at some point, my credit card on OpenAI account expired, and I don't have any more tokens. So I'm getting some kind of other errors from the field, from the player running in the field, and I have no idea because I'm not running this experience every single day on my Composer in my office. So what I did here on this send button is that I actually sent a log to interface analytics. What this will do is if I go into my analytics data, and I needed to wait 1 or 2 minutes to see that. So let's see if I talked enough to show that use case. 10, maybe. Let's see. So if you have some kind of process like every week, every 2 weeks, you are going to check the data from these analytics. Where is my Excel? Come on, Excel. Come on to the right screen, please. Too quick. Okay, I don't have the logs just yet. So if you have that process, you can, one, see there is no error. So you can just have a count. Okay, 12, this looks better. You could have your dashboard, 0 errors reported in the last month. Good. You can even show that in your dashboard. You don't even need to look into the data. But if you do see some errors logged, then you can download your Excel file, open it if Excel wants to cooperate, and you can actually get the error itself in here because you decided to add it to your logs. So if I enable, there you go. So I can see on this particular player on this date, there is an invalid authorization header. I can take action on that. And what you can do is count the events we have the error name in here. So you see in your analytics if there is any action to do. This can be valuable to monitor on the long term in terms of operational data. Have you had any kind of errors? The way to do that in Composer can be super simple. as soon as you use an AI created with the API Explorer, so a web API, a REST-based API, on all of these interface assets, you will always have a request failed trigger. Usually, everybody uses the request started, the request completed, because that's the good case. You can also use the request failed to log an event and maybe even send an email. I can send an email to myself saying, hey, something happened. There's an issue here. If I were to look at my emails right now, I would know that there's an invalidation token on a machine named Rocket. That's my laptop. So use these error management triggers. On an API Explorer, is super simple. On an Xmosphere device, for example, you might not want to send an email every time you have a log. You would spam your mailbox. But you can log an event and see, okay, maybe on my machine, I'm using COM3 as a serial port. On the player in the field, COM3 doesn't work. Might be COM5. Joy of using Windows. Maybe the RFID tags, the guy at the installation stuck into the object is the wrong one. He picked the right tag, so that's why the experience is not working as expected. To help remotely debug these things where you're not in the field yourself, analytics can be very valuable to bring this information back from the field to your account so you can analyze it. And I said I would not talk too much, so I'm going to stop here. See if you have any questions and see if it brings ideas on how you can improve your analysis of potential issues.
Seb, can you show where you're getting the error message? You showed how to log it, but the actual field you're using.
Yeah, that's a good one. So on a web API, so an interface asset created with the API Explorer, request failed comes with two parameters. So when I decide to log an event, I can give a name here, daily error. And then on the binding, again, if you look at the trigger itself, request failed, it comes with a raw response and a status code. The raw response is that JSON here that the API is sending back. OpenAI sends back a JSON. Another API may send back some plain text. It depends. But in any case, this raw response will contain the most details you can have about the error itself. Status code, I added here. Usually it's maybe a 404 or 504, depending if it's a content not found or non-authorized 403. So it might help the more IT people to quickly figure out what it's on. I like the plain text, but that's very personal opinion. Just put both.
You used Dolly as an example, and I think you mentioned it. Dolly's IA was created with API Explorer. There are other OpenAI IAs. They also have error received, though, right? You didn't use API Explorer for it, which is, I guess, a best practice. If you're writing a custom interface asset, a best practice is to capture and expose to a trigger an error. Is that true?
It is. So if I take a custom interface asset, so this one is written in .NET, and when we wrote the code for this IA, we did include an error message received trigger to mimic what we automatically have with API Explorer and to ensure we comply with this best practice of handle correctly what works great, but also handle correctly what might not work as expected, error management. Not a lot of people here in this meeting are creating custom interface assets. That's why I wanted to talk more about the API Explorer, because this is automatic. All your IAs, even if I use the one from the New York Times, you will get a request failed if you have some kind of error. The most common one is you don't have internet connection or your credential key is wrong. But the same applies to the ones you might create yourselves or the ones you might use from the ones we provide off the shelf, like the ChatGPT, where we do have error message received. That's true.
But at the end of the day, you want to be proactive in case there's an error, not just optimistic and assume it's going to work, but proactively say, if it doesn't work, how do we capture this data? And this is a really great way to do it. Seb, thank you for that. No other questions there, which means we can go to Ryan to introduce the last topic. Ryan, hopefully you can join us and share your screen and Tell us a little bit about a moment about yourself, because people know your name but not you, and then you can jump into this topic. Huh?
Hey, again, I'm Ryan Driscoll. You guys probably have seen my name around at points, either responding to tickets or on community, but or maybe you haven't because everything's going swimmingly, which is awesome. But if you ever have any questions, feel free. Always send me messages. I love questions. I love trying to figure out solutions. So don't be shy. Now, today, what I'm going to go over is some of the importance of timing of actions. As Jeff explained earlier, sometimes you could have a series of actions where it's not behaving exactly the way you need it to behave or expect it to behave. So I'm going to give you some examples of when that might happen and what you can do to correct that. So here I have basic check-in. I put my name there. When I click this check-in button, I expect to see my name and the time I checked in right over here. So I go ahead and I click that check-in. I don't see that information. Now, that's odd. So let me go ahead and see why it is that I don't see that information. So if we go and this is the check-in button here. If we look at the actual timing of the actions, I have a go to scene, which goes to the next scene, which would show the list of the check-ins, and a simulate tap on a button. That button is having actions on it that will add rows to my Excel here. Now they're both set to happen at the same time. So what's actually end up happening is we're going to the next scene, timing 2, and trying to use a button that is no longer accessible because it's on the previous scene. So what we could do to help with that, to rectify that, is implement a delay. So if we go and we have a go to scene and we do a delay, I just have a half-second delay here. And again, with the same simulate tab. So that will give the tap action time to be pressed and then go to the next scene. So let's see now if we go to my next one here. So now let's put me back in, check in, and look at that. There's Ryan. He's gone ahead and he checked in. Now another time that timing could be important of your actions is if you have animations of certain items. So here I have a button here that I expect to take a snapshot of the second page of this PDF document. So when I click this snapshot, it didn't take a picture of the second page, it took a picture of the first page. Reason for that is there wasn't a delay put in to adjust for the amount of time of the animation. So I go ahead and I do it a second time. Now this one has the delay, and there's the correct page that I'm looking to get a screenshot of. So just a quick shot of what that looks like. So again, I have my action and then my snapshot. So my action is going to take some amount of time, and then I do a snapshot. Again, the snapshot is only a half-second later, but it gives enough time for that animation to happen. Now, another time where you might have to put in a delay is if you're using like a REST API. For example, I'm using Airtable, the REST API, and it's using the same information, the same database that Seb had showed before with the baseball players. So if I go and I enter in Emily Smith, what I'm expecting to happen is Emily Smith's information to pop up here in the upper right corner. So I go ahead and I click search. It wasn't her information because the filter that I applied to the Airtable didn't complete before I went ahead and I updated the information. If I go and reset the scene, put the name correctly, and then search again, but this time put a delay, now the information is what I expect it to be. And this, again, is the example here of putting a delay. Now, the delay that I have with this with this API call is a little bit longer, because sometimes depending on network speeds and what you're asking, it might take some more time. So you might want to give it more time. I went ahead and gave it an extra second before I went ahead and filled this information in. My last example here is with our HCMS. Again, the same exact data. Now, when I enter Emily's information in, this time it comes up right away. There's two reasons for that. One, I'm using a decent machine, performance machine, and also this base is cached locally, so it doesn't need to go out online to find the information and pull it down. You still might need to go and include a delay if you are working with a machine that isn't, or a player device that isn't necessarily the fastest, or might be a little bit lower end, to go and give it time. If you have a base that has a lot of media in it and you're doing a lot of filtering to it, you're going to want to go ahead and add a delay in there. And this hammers home the idea of making sure to always test your experience on the player device that is ultimately going to be running it. So that way you can ensure that the actions and performance are happening the way you expect them to happen. And those are, again, it's all about timing. Those are what I got for you. Any questions there, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I know I do,
Okay.
just a couple. So the trick is you don't know how long to wait. It's funny because in earlier when Seb was talking about the Headless CMS, there is a sync completed trigger. So you know when it's completed. So there is an indicator of when it's safe to pull information from the local cache. There will be scenarios where there is some idea that it is now ready for X, Y, and Z. But in other cases, there's no way to know. So there's no way to know the right delay, in fact, right, Brian? I mean, it's a little bit of educated guesswork.
It is educated guesswork. I mean, if you expect a certain result every time when a filter is applied, you could set something up to look for that result. So if you're expecting a certain value to always be available, you could look for that, and then if that shows, you can trigger off of that, use that as a condition of one of your triggers.
Okay.
I would add one thing here, and Jeff, it's to make the difference between talking about the CMS, sync is completed, which is a trigger, and filter is completed, which is not. So when you apply a filter to filter your list, we don't have a trigger telling you that the filter has actually been applied, because it should be kind of instant. So when you're using the CMS, what Ryan showed here on his machine, he doesn't need any delay, and most of the case, that's true. That's what happens. Unless you're using a $50 Android stick, where you might have some delay required. On the CMS, applying a filter to do a search, you probably won't need a delay. Now, if you use an API like Airtable, you do have a way to know how long you need to wait, because we have requests completed as a trigger. And when you apply a filter on these APIs, you are doing a request. You are querying the base remotely. You are sending a request and then getting the request response. And you could use that request completed trigger to make sure that, yeah, I got my answer. I know what I'm looking for.
I think what's maybe most important is recognition that not every trigger is instantaneous, right? And that the order matters.
Yes.
And maybe you have to wait a little bit or a lot, but it is natural, I think, if you have a multi-action trigger, to just list all the actions and think it's going to work. And computers are fast, but they're not always fast enough. And that one reason why your multi-action trigger isn't working is because the timing is off, because something is happening too quickly. And I noticed, by the way, I didn't even know this, Ryan, is that I always thought that maybe I didn't see it right. You had two actions, and you delayed the first one.
Yes.
I always thought that like the order that it's listed implies some level of order in terms of timing, but it doesn't have to. if I read that right.
Not definitively, depending on how long the action takes that are in the order. So, but if you're explicit with your timing, then the order doesn't necessarily matter. So you could be, if you're just making changes rather than going and reordering that whole list, you can go and just change your times. And now you've been explicit with the time, how long you want to wait before this happens.
It's you get this a lot, right, Ryan? I mean, this is not unusual. This is a question that props up periodically. Why is this not working? It's a time.
It is, because I think people have the same exact thought that you did, Jeff. Is like, oh, I have it in this order. They're dominoes. It should work like dominoes, and it doesn't necessarily work that way. Now, if you notice what I have, like my seeds, I have a lot of information on them. I'm using that kind of as diagnosis as well, where I might have, where I might show the results of my filter, so that way I can see it in real time happening.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Ryan. We're going to bring you back because you're the one dealing with these questions on a daily basis. You have a lot of good experience with it. Look, I'm looking at the clock. We're scheduled for 45. We will take some questions if there's any in the audience, but I did just want to share that Seb and I will be in Las Vegas June 13 and 14 at Infocom. We don't have a booth. We'll be walking the floor. We'll be visiting partners. We'll be visiting customers, but we are available for getting together if you want to meet and have a discussion about, I guess it could be about anything, although most likely about Intuitive Face. So we'll both be there in Vegas. It'd be nice if you're there. Let us know. Just send us an email and we can arrange something. Let me see if there's any other questions in the audience. I don't think so. Which means we might actually finish on time for a change, which is very nice. Ryan, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. Well, usually I usually have a lot of jokes. How do Vikings
you don't have
with
to.
each other? Yes. How do Vikings communicate with each other? Norse code. There you go. That's pretty good, right? Nothing from Ryan. If I can't get Ryan, that was a bit.
Well, you know, if I hadn't heard it already.
All right. Hey, Seb, as always, thanks very much. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And to you in the audience, thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you in another quarter with more cool topics. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.